Oliver Twist. The Charles Dickens Children's Collection. In the workhouse. Oliver Twist was an orphan. His mother died on the very day he was born. No one knew who his father was. He was given the surname Twist by the beadle. The beadle, whose name was Mr. Bumble, was a kind of church policeman. He was responsible for finding homes for orphans and making sure they were taken care of. But Mr. Bumble didn't have much time for children. Oliver grew up in a baby farm. This was a place that looked after young children without parents. The local church paid for their care, but they didn't pay very much, certainly not enough for toys, cakes or Christmas trees, or any of the things that children enjoy. A woman called Mrs. Mann ran the baby farm. She was selfish and kept most of the money she was meant to spend on the children for herself. As a result, the children were always hungry and only had old, torn clothes that were always too big or too small. By the time Oliver Twist was 9 years old, he was a pale, thin child. But on the inside he was clever, kind and spirited. Now he was 9, he was too old to stay at the baby farm. Mr. Bumble came to take Oliver Ed off to the workhouse. This was where poor people were fed and sheltered, though not well, in exchange for work. Oliver's job was to unpick old tar-covered strands of ship's rope so the fiber could be used again. It was boring, and it hurt his hands. Oliver and the other boys who worked there were fed in a large stone hall. There was a great copper bowl at one end, and the workhouse master ladled gruel out of it at meal times. The gruel was a sort of watery porridge. The boys were allowed 1 ladle of gruel, no more. It was all they ate, except on special occasions when they each got a small piece of bread. For months, Oliver Twist and his companions slowly starved. At last, they got so desperate that they decided someone had to speak up, someone had to ask for more food. The task fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived, and the boys took their places. The master, in his cook's uniform, stationed himself by the copper bowl. The gruel was served. The gruel was eaten up, every last watery drop of it. The boys whispered to each other, and winked at Oliver. 2 of them nudged him. Oliver was desperate from hunger and misery. He rose from the table, bowl and spoon in hand, and walked up to the master. "Please, sir, I want some more," he said. The master turned very pale. He gazed in shock at Oliver for some seconds. The boys in the hall were shaking with fear. "What?" bellowed the master in disbelief. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, "I want some more." The master hit Oliver on the head with the ladle, and shrieked for Mr. Bumble. The beadle dragged Oliver off to the gentleman who ran the workhouse. They all looked well-fed and well-dressed, unlike Oliver. These gentlemen were in a very important meeting when Mr. Bumble entered. He announced with a roar, "I beg your pardon, sirs. Oliver Twist has asked for more." Every face looked round in horror. "For more," said one gentleman who was wearing a white waistcoat. "Do I understand that he asked for more after he had eaten his ration of supper?" "He did, sir," replied Bumble. "This boy will be come to a bad end," said the gentleman. "I know he will." They ordered Oliver to be locked up overnight. The next morning a poster was put up outside. It offered £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist away with them. Soon enough, they found someone willing to take Oliver. Mr. Sowerberry was an undertaker. He was a tall, gaunt man, dressed in a threadbare black suit. He thought Oliver could be useful to him, sweeping and cleaning in the workshop where the coffins were made. Mr. Sowerberry was not an unkind man. In a way, Oliver's life with him was better than in the workhouse, even though he had to sleep in a room full of half-built coffins. On the other hand, Mr. Sowerberry's wife lived up to their name. She was sour and bad-tempered, and didn't like Oliver at all. There was another young assistant called Noah who thought he was far better than Oliver. He teased and mocked the young boy by calling him workhouse and insulting Oliver's mother. She was a bad un, he said, a regular right-down bad un. Oliver could not remember his mother. He didn't even know her name, but he was very protective of her. One day Noah's teasing and taunting went too far and they fought. Oliver won. Noah complained to Mr. and Mrs. Sowerberry. The Sowerberrys faced Oliver like judges. Noah called my mother names, said Oliver. That's why I hit him. So what if he did, said Mrs. Sowerberry. Your mother deserved what he said, and worse. She didn't, said Oliver. She did, said Mrs. Sowerberry. It's a lie, shouted Oliver. Mrs. Sowerberry burst into a flood of tears. Mr. Sowerberry was forced to take action. He hit Oliver several times, and then sent him off to bed in the coffin workshop. Once he was by himself, Oliver decided that there was nothing for him here. No family. No future. He had to escape. At Fagins's. As the first rays of the sun struggled through the shutters in the workshop, Oliver got up. He quietly unlocked the door to the street and then paused. Left or right? He turned left, walked up a hill, and then cut across some fields. He passed Mrs. Mann's baby farm with a shutter and arrived at a high road. He sat down by a milestone. It said, London 70 miles. But that was all right. Oliver was determined to seek his fortune far away. He survived the next few days thanks to the kindness of a road mender, who gave him some bread and cheese, and an old woman, who gave him a little money. On the 7th morning, Oliver limped into the town of Barnet, near to London. He sank down on a doorstep. He was exhausted. After a time, he noticed a boy of about his age staring at him. The boy was short, with a snub nose and sharp little eyes. "Hello," he said to Oliver. "What's the news?" "I'm very hungry and tired," replied Oliver. "I have been walking for 7 days." "Walking for 7 days," said the boy. "Then you'll want some grub, and you shall have it." He bought Oliver some ham and a loaf of bread at a nearby shop. Oliver discovered his new friend's name was Jack Dawkins, although most people called him the Artful Dodger. "Going to London?" asked Jack. "Yes," said Oliver. "Got anywhere to stay?" "No." "Money?" "No, I've got to be in London tonight and I know a respectable old gentleman who lives there," said Jack. "He'll give you somewhere to sleep for nothing." Jack and Oliver spent the whole day walking to London. By 7 o'clock that evening they arrived in a particularly dirty part of the city. The streets were narrow and muddy. Men and women lounged in doorways. Babies screamed inside the rundown houses, and children scurried about everywhere. Oliver was thinking of running away again, but then Jack grabbed him by the arm and steered him into one of the houses. A rough-looking man stuck his head out of a door at the end of a passage. He was holding a candle. There was a woman behind him. "Why, it's the Dodger," the woman said. "Hello, Nance," said Jack. "There's 2 of you," growled the man. Who's the other one? A new pal, said Jack. Is Fagin upstairs? He's sorting out the loot, said the man. The two boys climbed a dark, rickety staircase. At the top, Jack threw open a door. The room behind it was black with dirt and soot. Sitting around a table were 4 boys of about Oliver's age. Against the far wall there were beds made out of old sacking. A wrinkled old man was cooking sausages with a toasting fork by the fire. He had matted red hair and wore a greasy coat. Fagin, said Jack to the old man, this is my friend, Oliver Twist. Fagin made a bow in Oliver's direction. Very glad to see you, my dear, he said. The boys welcomed him too. They shook his hand, helped him take his coat and hat off, and even tried to empty his pockets for him. This help was not needed as Oliver's pockets were empty. The table was littered with handkerchiefs. Fagin noticed Oliver staring at them and said, We've just got him out ready for the wash, that's all, Oliver. Ha ha ha. Was this the loot the man downstairs had mentioned? Oliver was confused but, above all, he was hungry. He ate his share of the sausages with gusto. The food, together with the long day's walk, made him drowsy. He sank down on one of the piles of sacking. Soon, he was sound asleep. The boys were out of the room most of each day. They were friendly. It was almost as if they were all part of one big family. They came back with assorted items like handkerchiefs, wallets, watch chains, and sometimes even watches. Fagin would examine all these items, and sometimes praise the boy who'd brought them for his workmanship. He got very angry if a boy came back with nothing, however. How did they have the time to make these things? Oliver didn't know. Oliver was a little frightened of W. Fagin, even though the old man was giving him food and shelter. He was much more frightened of the man downstairs, whose name was Bill Sikes. Sikes had a violent temper. The boys often heard the sounds of arguing between him and the woman, who was called Nancy. Like everyone, Nancy was frightened of Sikes, but she seemed to love him too. She was kind to Oliver. She smiled at him and asked him how he was doing. Oliver wasn't sure how to answer, but it was nice to be asked. From things he overheard, Oliver realized that Sikes and Fagin were in business together. But what kind of business? Oliver found the answer about a week after he'd first arrived at Fagin's. He was out walking with Jack, whom he now called the Artful Dodger like everyone else, and a boy called Charlie. Suddenly the Dodger stopped. See that gent by the bookstall, he said. The one in the green coat? He'll do, said Charlie. Oliver stood and watched as his friends crept up behind the man in the green coat. He was reading a book from the stall. Oliver was horrified to see the Dodger plunge his hand into the gentleman's pocket and draw out a handkerchief. In an instant Oliver realized just what it was the boys did each and every day. This was where all the handkerchiefs and notebooks and watches came from. His new friends were pickpockets and thieves. Oliver stood there, both horrified and amazed. Unfortunately, the gentleman reached for his pocket at that very moment and saw what was happening. The two boys ran as fast as they could. So did Oliver. But he wasn't as quick or experienced as the others. By the time the cry "Stop thief" went up, the Dodger and Charlie vanished. But Oliver was hardly round the first corner when he was knocked down by a huge man. A crowd gathered. Oliver lay on the ground covered in mud and dust. The crowd parted to let through the gentleman from the bookstall and a police officer. Yes, said the gentleman, that is the boy.